Kevin Sullivan. Thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, David. How about yourself?
Good, good. So I'm very excited to have you. I know so much about you just from following your work and about Evolve and the follow you on LinkedIn, but we never actually get a chance to actually have a intimate discussion. So I'm super excited. Why don't we get started with like the easy question? Maybe like walk me through memory lane. How do you become a technologist?
Yeah. Well, it. So I don't know how much of an easy question that actually is. It's a long story, right? But I'll give the Cliff Notes version of it. So my foray into technology started. I remember being probably about 7 or 8 years old. Um, Family brought home the first computer. I don't even know what the operating system was running. It was some form of a shell OS, kind of pre-Windows days. Decided I was going to start experimenting with it, and of course wanted to install a game, I'm sure, onto that platform, and realized that we didn't have enough disk space. But I knew just enough to be dangerous, and figured I was going to free up some space. In doing so, I erased every single thing off of that machine. Was back to having a flashing white cursor in the upper left-hand corner, and 7 or 8 year old me stayed up that entire night in secret rebuilding that whole system from a case full of floppy disks, and somehow never got caught. So I either did a convincing enough job, or my parents caught on and just decided to be lenient and play along since I put in the effort of fixing it. But I think that started a journey that led me into the career and the profession that I'm at now. So I went to school, went to Temple University over my shoulder here. Majored in information science technology, learned a lot of programming, which is absolutely nothing related to my day-to-day actual career at all. But came out of Temple and worked for a real estate investment firm. So a number of different investment companies that had a consolidated back office. I was on their support team in a help desk role for 2 days. So my second day there, I had taken on a project to distribute an updated version of an antivirus application to everyone in the company. And I think they thought that was going to take a few months to get done. And I had pushed it out by the time I came in on my second day via login script to everyone in the company. And I knew one way or the other I wasn't still going to be working in that help desk by the end of my first week. So I got moved up into systems administration. Been a sysadmin, was the director of IT for them, then jumped over to the cloud side. I've been a project manager, director of customer success, sales engineer, solutions architect. I feel, I've had the blessing through I guess I'm an old guy, so now what feels like a long career, of really having the luxury of working in a variety of different capacities, both as a customer and as a provider. And I love the way that I feel like that helps me connect to customers when we're engaged in sales opportunities, and even the way it helps me working with other partners and vendors. I don't know if it's a unique lens per se, because I think there are a lot of other folks out there in the industry that have had a myriad of experiences like that too, but certainly I'm appreciative of every step I've taken on that journey and where it's gotten me to today. So sorry, that's like a 45-minute long answer to it.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. And then, I'll ask you at the end maybe to bust a few tunes. I see that you're a musician as well.
Sure.
So
We'll spend the last 20 minutes doing nothing but springs.
yeah, well, we can do that. I mean, it might be even more fun than talking about cyber. Talk to me about the transition. So you have a unique approach where you were at the client side, and now you're at the vendor side. And that really provides some glimpse into the inner works of that relationship, and it actually resonates. I'm pretty sure it resonates with clients, meaning that you speak from a person who was there in their shoes, right?
Yeah, I definitely hope so. And I feel like in most cases it does. Because look, at the end of the day, I mean, the solutions that we sell change, technology changes over time. But I honestly, genuinely believe that the business challenges that we're solving tomorrow are the same ones that we're solving today, which are the same ones that we were solving yesterday, right? So it's really a matter of understanding, how we work collectively to use the tools that we all know we have in the toolbox to build something that actually helps us have some real world, measurable, tangible benefit. And I think that's something that gets lost a lot when you deal with folks who are just kind of solely working in the technology space. And yeah, I think they have solutions that can do things to help customers, but if you've never actually lived some of that pain yourself, it becomes pretty hard to put a finger exactly on the pulse of where that connection happens.
And it's interesting because we've been on a quote unquote digital transformation journey for so many years. And some of the challenges is the same, or maybe just again, to transform it is something that looks alike, very much so. But are we winning that goal of becoming more digitized, or are we still struggling, with the same issues that you were struggling in when you were a sysadmin, but now we have a different name for it?
Yeah, it's funny, right? The nature of the problems, I feel, remains the same. It's just the fact that the way we can apply technology to help with them, that's what really starts to fundamentally change, right? So it's always a matter of kind of doing things better, faster, more securely. And it's always a sliding scale, right? Because what we would consider to be security today is probably vastly different from what we would have considered to be a secure environment 4 years ago, which is vastly different from what would have been a secure environment 5 years prior to that. So I feel like it's always just availing ourselves of the additional capabilities that technology puts before us. But also, look, and I hate to beat the proverbial dead horse of it. 2020 fundamentally changed the industry, right? It absolutely changed the way we all work. It changed the way our customers all work. And it's made for some interesting challenges in terms of how to embrace a hybrid workforce or how to embrace mobility and how to do so securely. Because, I mean, you pop on the nightly news these days and it's unprecedented, the level and severity of threats that face most companies, right? Like every story is a breach or a ransomware attack or an issue with data being leaked or lost and then being sold somewhere on the out there in the third party in the black market and the dark web, wherever it might be. I recently I myself had an issue with personal identifying information getting out there and someone attempting to commit credit card fraud and signed up for a service. I won't plug them directly, but signed up for a service that came back and notified me it was over 1,100 individual instances of prior accounts having been compromised. Now, of those 1,100 alerts, probably 900, some of them were, innocuous, but there were 200 things in there that really needed to be evaluated and addressed because, how many times on a weekly basis do you sign up for something and make an account and set a set of credentials and maybe log into a news aggregation site a couple times and then never go back and revisit that account, right? Those things all accumulate out there, and it's just how do we then take kind of that new reality along with some of the new technology that's available and mesh those two things together?
Yeah, and I personally get several phishing attacks on a regular basis. I got an fake email from somebody who got compromised, who's my contact list just yesterday. I get password reset attempts, token attempt where, verify your login here. We seem like to be constantly bombarded with, it's like a jungle out there. We operate digitally, like for everything. We rarely go to the bank anymore. We do all our stuff remote. But it's akin to somebody walking around the jungle with a lot of predators out there trying to have your next meal. And you're not ill prepared. I think the majority of us, even us, that we dabble with cybersecurity and technology. It's easy to fall into, how many times I got a .htm file, if it's an invoice or some other nonsense that click here for your purchase verification or something like that. I mean, it's crazy to me, and it's daunting to think about what do regular people do? People that it's not their bread and butter, and these are the people that we are trying to protect from a technology perspective. You like the you've kind of every once in a while you bring the phrase outcome oriented IT. Um, how does that differ from traditional IT strategies?
Yeah, so especially in the service provider space, I feel like it's a little bit of a different approach that's more customer centric in helping them to try to achieve the objectives that they're setting out to, as opposed to taking a solution that might be like newer or the latest and greatest technology with a lot of features and benefits and leading with that, right? So, I'm a firm believer, Eddie, more the longer that I do this, that, this might be a little bit of a hot take statement, but features don't matter, right? At the end of the day, if you're going out and looking at some form of a solution, most likely in my world, it's a cloud solution, right? Some form of like cloud-based service from a CSP. Features tend to benefit the seller, right? They tend to benefit the solution, and they don't tend to benefit the buyer, right? But think about all the times you've sat in the past through a demo of some form of an offering or a solution where, the SC or the AE or the SAE, whatever their terminology might be, they're going through a laundry list of things that are totally extraneous and irrelevant to your needs, right? But it's all like, wow, did you know that this product can do this and it can do that and it can do this? At the end of the day, I don't really care, right? Like I need something that solves for my specific needs, because that's when a feature has a tangible benefit applied to it and becomes a value, right? So value-based selling, value-based buying, and really focusing everything that we do on solving for whatever that specific business challenge or set of business challenges is that a prospective customer, a customer, a partner are looking to solve for. And when I talk about like outcome-oriented IT, that's really what I wanted to be focused on. Not, some folks take that a little bit too far, right? Like I'm not a firm believer that you need to be totally agnostic in what your tool set is. Like I don't like when a company tells you like, oh, like, we're going to give you a desktop solution. And the customer asks like, okay, like what does it run on? And the answer is don't worry about it, because that technology might change several times over several years. I feel like that's maybe taking it a step too far. But you are not buying based on the brand name of what that provider is using either, right? Like you're buying based on their ability to actually help you solve the problem that you're setting out to solve.
And what if, so that's, first of all, that was impactful. I think I would like probably have a 10-second, silence just to let it sink in what you just described. And no, but seriously, but I can see a problem with it, both on the customer side, where they're unclear on their own what it is that they want. Like Ford mentioned that if you ask people what they wanted faster horses. And then on the vendor side, they're also kind of unclear. A lot of times they're being told by product management or the sales organizations to hammer down these features, because these are the killer features that are, they're going to sell the product and differentiate themselves from all the other vendors out there. So they're also between a rock and a hard place. So what you said is very impactful, but in actuality might be difficult to implement. As somebody who's proponent of this, maybe you can suggest some best practices both on the vendor side and then on the client side. Like, how do you distill what it is that you really want? How do you distill the features that you really think about, and in terms of approach?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very fair question, and I personally, I always love that Henry Ford quote, right? And the info, I think, is, what is it? If I asked people what they would have wanted, they'd have told me faster horses, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a very real challenge that you face, right? Like, very often you come across, customers that might not have their proverbial ducks in a row, right? They might be kind of kicking the tires and getting a sense of, what is the new technology that's out there? What's the solution that's out there? But yeah, I don't go shopping for a screwdriver before I figure out what kind of screws I'm going to use, right? Like, there has to be some form of a compelling event, some form of a motivating factor for someone to go out and go through the arduous, time-consuming process of buying a technology solution, right? We don't go out and do these things because they're fun. We don't go out and do them because they're easy. We go out and do them because they have some form of a measurable impact to make our organization better. Like to think that it's to make our organization more productive, but I also think maybe that's not necessarily the case anymore either, because there's a lot of folks out there that view things like, hey, I have productivity in one hand, I have security in the other, and I'm always fighting this delicate balancing act between the two. Now, I would make a conjecture that doesn't have to be the case. There are ways that you can effectively have both of those things, but customers have to really have a sense of what they have and what they're looking to accomplish with it. Especially in my history in kind of the disaster recovery and business continuity space, we used to see a ton of this. And it would be customers that would come to a vendor and basically say like, hey, I want to be protected, right? Our natural response would be, great, like, what do you have and to what varying degrees of protection do you want it to be? And they couldn't answer that question because in their mind, it's, well, I have data, right? And I want my data to be secure and protected. But David, there's a reason that they don't make the entire plane out of what the black box is made out of, right? And it's because it's impractical, it's unaffordable, and it just flat out won't work at the end of the day. So you have to really have a sense of like, these are the levels of data that I have. This is my mission critical data. If I'm in a healthcare organization, this is my life critical data. This is what's business critical. We can survive, we can't survive for more than 4 hours without this stuff. We can survive for up to a day without this stuff. We can have this stuff that just comes back from backup as long as the data survives whatever the cataclysmic event is. That can come back in a couple of days, a week, a month. It doesn't really matter. But having that internal knowledge of what your systems, what your data, what your applications are, and a lot of good data hygiene that goes into that as well, right? So having actual lines of demarcation between those different levels that makes it a lot easier to engage with. So, the first step that you kind of have to take if you're on that buyer's journey is really, it sounds so simple that I don't even like saying it because it's a little bit too high level of an outlook here, but understanding what you have, right?
And Kevin, has nothing to do with technology, really. What you just described, that's before any kind of shopping for technology or having any discussion with anybody. It's like having your house in order, what you just described. And that process is, I don't know, it's just maybe, I don't know in actuality, how do you do that? You just go talk to people, like figure out, like you go to the business units, discuss all that, you go to the application owners, discuss, there's a lot of, sounds to me like a lot of data gathering and a lot of conversation needs to happen first.
Yeah, it's definitely not the fun part, right? The fun part is, who doesn't love to go shopping, right? So the fun part,
especially with somebody else's money, Kevin.
Very true. But the fun part is going out there and learning about all these new technology, new solutions that are available to you. But if you don't do the hard part first, if you don't invest in having your house in order, then there's going to be a lot of futility in those efforts, and there's going to be a lot of maybe not necessarily wasted money because maybe you won't move forward with a purchase, but you're certainly going to be wasting a lot of your own and your team's time.
And are there any compelling events, you kind of alluded to that makes people move? It seems like a lot of times it's like nothing happens until something happens, and a lot of organizations are very reactive as opposed to being proactive. So there's a compelling event, something happens. Talk to me about that. At one point in time, what does that event look like? And are there any times where you push back and say, time out, I would love to sell you something, but it doesn't seem like you even know where to start. You're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of answer those in reverse order, right? So I don't know that I've ever been in a situation where we've just flat out said to a customer or a prospect, like, hey, you need to go back to the drawing board and then come back to us, because at that point, it's a great opportunity to take a consultative selling approach and to start working with that customer, right? To maybe help them understand, help them shed some light. And a lot of it, in the role that I'm in now, the organization I'm at now, we won't be that consultant for you, right? We don't have that arm of our business. We are a solutions provider who handles everything from the cloud side in. But those of us who've been in the game and the industry long enough, we've all done that kind of work, right? So certainly happy to kind of, lend an eye, lend a hand, lend an ear, and help that customer get off on that journey the way they need to, while remaining plugged in with them, so that one, we can be there as a sounding board to help them, and two, not selflessly at all, so that we can be there to be the vendor of choice, when it comes time for them to make a decision and move forward. So it really helps to, strengthen that relationship, be an asset for them, be an advocate for them. And then hopefully that door swings both ways. And when it comes time for them to move forward with a solution, they become an advocate for your organization as well. That said, as far as compelling events goes, I mean, these days it really comes down to security, right? I feel like, if you look at, I'm not a huge analytics guy, but if you look at like Gartner and Frost and Sullivan and Forrester reports from the last 2-3 years, IT budgets in general are going down, right? So there's this constant pressure. IT was always asked to do a lot, but since 2022, IT has been asked to do more with less, and they've been asked to do a lot more with a lot less than they've ever had at any other point previously. So those budgets, the belts are tightening, there are more rubber bands going around the wallet, and it's just becoming a bigger task for IT teams. So that's interesting. But what's also interesting to me is while those IT budgets are going down, there are two key areas where that spending is continuing to actually increase. And those are security and in CX, right? So customer experience, client experience, user experience. I feel like we can kind of lump all those things into one now. So the question then to me becomes, how do you read those tea leaves, right? And what does that tell you about what's happening in the industry? And I think it's all about being able to maximize productivity, right? Because at the end of the day, to me, that's where that CX story is told. If I can make my users work better, my customers are happier.
And it's interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting because these two they are conflicting a little bit. The CX is not necessarily lends itself to security.
Yeah, because users see security as hoops that they have to jump through in order to get to the things they need to do in order to do their job, right? They see it as like, oh, multi-factor authentication, man, it's just one more thing I have to log into, right? Single sign-on, great. Now I have to go to this website to access this other website that then lets me access. But if you can implement those things in a way that makes sense, then I think you're actually tying, not just productivity and CX together, but you're tying security and CX together, and you're elevating and uplifting both of those things at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And doing this for the past 7 years, have you seen progression in terms of cloud? It seems like we move in tandem. It's like we go to the cloud, we back on-prem, and then hybrid, and back on to the cloud. What have you seen from the evolution perspective? And it's a fast-moving target as well, right? We just recently seen this huge impact of CrowdStrike taking down millions of endpoints because of Windows update or whatever. So that's going to make an impact. So talk to me about the evolution of that. Where do you see things going?
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct, right? Like I've always kind of described it as there's this IT pendulum that just keeps swinging back and forth between consolidated computing and distributed computing, back to consolidated computing, back to distributed computing. And we've seen that this predates cloud by a long margin, right? This goes back to, mainframe versus personal computing, right? Edge computing. Virtualization was kind of the next big thing that changed the game there by, then reconsolidating all of our resources back into the data center with the virtual machines. Then along came cloud, then came public cloud and hybrid cloud. Now you're distributing that workload across a couple different consolidated resources that exist out there. But I think, it's funny that those two things are indelibly linked to me, right? We talk about that pendulum swing, we talk about impending events, because I feel like 2024 has been a very strange year. And that's really driven by, up until 2 weeks ago, I would have said one thing. Now I'll say two. The CrowdStrike story is certainly a part of that, right? Anything that requires, I think it was something along the lines of like 10% of Windows 10 client devices were impacted by this. And 10% doesn't sound like a big number until you realize there are billions of Windows client devices that are out there. And the fact that it required manual intervention in order to fix, right? That is going to be an absolute spark for the end user computing industry, because now there are going to be conversations around like, how can we look at addressing something that maybe doesn't prevent this problem from happening in the future? Though that would be great, don't get me wrong, but maybe something that allows us to remediate at scale if this problem were to reoccur, right? So that we're not going out and touching thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices around the world when this type of problem manifests itself again, which, let's be real, I mean, something like this exact thing, no, but something like this is going to happen again. It won't be tomorrow, won't be next week, but at some point in the future. And the other piece is, if we go away from the end user computing side for a minute and look kind of more cloud hosting in general, all right? So servers, infrastructure as a service, disaster recovery, the Broadcom acquisition of VMware, that has reignited an infrastructure conversation that has been largely dormant since 2017, right? Because at that point, if you were in like 2022, 2023, folks weren't really coming to you to talk about like, hey, would you be interested in moving your servers to the cloud? Because if you didn't do it, it wasn't because you didn't know that it was an option, right? You made the conscious decision that cloud hosting was not for you. But now along comes Broadcom, VMware, and the licensing changes that they're implementing. And now you have a compelling reason of, hey, guess what? You're going to be going to some form of a subscription-based licensing model anyway. So it's probably time to reevaluate. Does it really make sense for you to continue to run those workloads in-house?
Yeah, and it's in that with everything becoming as a service, I feel. Subscription model. I mean, even me as a consumer of technology, it's Office 365, the Adobe Cloud as a service. I don't even know if there's any buy once the software anymore. I mean, I don't know. Even the Windows, it's all subscription based now. It's like there's almost very few, and it makes sense. Yeah, you have a repetitive expense, even as an individual, right? So you know exactly how much you're paying per month. And then you don't have to upgrade. I mean, you always get the constant, as long as you pay the subscription, you always, you know what's coming. But then the flip side of it is now, at least on my side, you have all these disjointed apps and things that you hope they're going to work together, and then you have to manage and sometimes update, and that can create, like, I can see that at scale, create like a lot of problems, and I think that's part of what you solve as a company, right? So you have the ability to manage, get rid of all the management headache at the endpoint level, right? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. Right, cloud sprawl is a very real thing, and interestingly, there's an entire industry practice with FinOps, right, that is spinning up to help customers address specifically that. Usually catering more toward public cloud, right? So if you're in an Azure, in an AWS, in a Google Cloud, how do you wrap your hands around that ever-increasing monthly invoice, right? Because let's be honest, in IT in general, we all tend to be really good at standing up new resources and really, really bad at winding them down when they're no longer in use. So it's just an exponentially growing environment that exists out there for most customers. So yeah, at Evolve IP, we are a private cloud hosting provider. We're a public cloud hosting provider. We do infrastructure as a service, business continuity, disaster recovery, end user computing through our desktop as a service platform. And we are also a voice company, right? So in our infancy, that's where we were founded. We were a voice over IP provider back in 2007. So unified communications before it was unified communications. We do contact center. We do collaboration with Microsoft Teams and WebEx, or Cisco WebEx as well. But for us, to me, I think where we become most compelling for a customer is not necessarily when you're looking to tie all of that stuff together, because there's a lot there. And usually if you're in a buying cycle, you're probably not looking to buy all of those things simultaneously. Though if you are, I'll make sure you get my phone number and please give me a call. But for us, it's the ability to deliver multiples of that technology stack to help a customer make better sense of their environment, right? So not just doing desktop as a service, but doing desktop as a service paired with optimized unified communications or collaboration within there, right? Running a remote contact center, if you're a US-based company that is maybe in the Philippines, maybe in India, maybe in South America somewhere, and having US-based desktops that are close to where the back end of your call center operation is, but enabling access to those desktops from these international users that you now no longer have to provision devices for and put them out into the field. So really looking at ways that we can combine those different areas of technological specialty, and ways that we can layer solutions on top of each other to deliver custom tailored solutions that fit our customers' needs.
And how do you differ with for example, a traditional MSP? If I would just to kind of wrap my head around this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think when it comes to traditional MSPs, for me, our biggest differentiator is, like I mentioned, us having very deep technical benches with a wealth of experience on both the communications and the computing side of the house, right? So we don't lean into one space or the other. Where those things intersect is really our preferred area of operations and where we can provide the most value to our customers. So,
And
we work with, oh, sorry, go
no, and I would say I would double click on that, and I would say, is there anything else? I mean, really, when you think about it, what do people have the endpoint to begin with? You make it look like it's not the feature. That's what it is. Well, what do people do? They access some application and they on Zoom or in calls and communicate either through email or through voice or so. I would say this is all it is. I mean, unless there's some other forms, but I would say that's from an organizational perspective, that's probably like 80% of all traffic of all applications are related to these, to some productivity apps and communication.
Yeah, no, look, one thing that I don't like about our industry, we make things way more complicated than they need to be, right? At the end of the day, all any of these technologies are doing is helping to connect our people to their stuff, right? If we can securely and efficiently connect the people to the stuff so that they can work on that stuff wherever that stuff may be, wherever that person may be, that is the proper application of this technology to solve a business challenge, right? To go back to our earlier point. So the game changer to me, right, and the reason that desktop as a service or VDI or some form of consolidated end user computing is now like not only relevant but a preferred approach these days is that ability to take your communication tool with you, right? Like if we think about what VDI and desktop as a service were 5, 6, 7 years ago, great for productivity use cases, not good at all for media intensive use cases.
And why is that? I was about to ask you, Kevin, why is that? Why did they fail in that regards?
Yeah, so it's a combination of two things, right? So in one regard, it's the protocols. So as good as the remote desktop protocol is, RDP, the problem with RDP, and I say this all the time, is it's nearly as old as I am, right? So it was just not designed with these types of modern day use cases in mind. Now, Microsoft, to their credit, they're going through and making changes to that, but it's a long process, right? You're dealing with something that's kind of a monolithic structure in the RDP protocol. So along come VMware, along come Citrix, and they designed newer protocols that are better at handling that type of work. In the case of VMware, they do RTAV optimization via their proprietary VMware Blast Extreme protocol. In the case of Citrix, they do HDX over ICA. And really what those protocols are doing is they're smart enough to say, hey, David, Kevin, I know you're on a virtual desktop. I know that virtual desktop is running on a virtual machine. And guess what that virtual machine has? It has virtual CPU. You know what virtual CPU is not good at doing? Audio and video encoding and decoding. So, you know what is good at doing audio and video encoding and decoding? That processor that you have that's on that client device that you're connecting to this VDI or DaaS seat from. So wouldn't it be cool if we could keep all of our call flow, keep all of our call handling in that containerized desktop, but then leverage the connection we have to that physical device through our client application to offload the parts of that virtual machine that's not good at. And that, when we talk about optimization, that's really all we're talking about. We're talking about the DaaS solution and the underlying protocol being smart enough to say, David, you're in a Teams call. This DaaS seat can run the Teams call, but it's not good at processing it. So we're going to leverage your VMware Horizon connection to your laptop, and we're going to offload to that CPU all of the encoding and decoding work, but your call's still going to stay in this virtual desktop. So you don't have to worry about that split brain mode of like, well, if I want to do work, I go here, and then I minimize this. If I want to make a call, I go there. No, all that stuff happens in one location now and happens with that optimization.
So you just described the secret sauce, I think, for success. No, I'm serious. You open up the kimono to exactly how this thing works and why it works so well. And what the problem that you guys solve, as you mentioned, the VDI did not have that. The VDI would, again, if I rephrase what you just described, the VDI was trying to process all that voice and video communication on the virtual CPU with crappy results. And then you as a company went ahead and took all that expertise from years of doing telecom VoIP work, and then offloaded some of that critical work to the CPU itself through the application, and make it all run seamlessly like magic to the user.
Yeah, and look, I'm a firm believer in Evolve IP and our solutions, so I don't say this disparagingly of ourselves at all, but at the end of the day, any provider who offers these solutions can tell you that they offer optimization, right? Because optimization is just a group policy configuration. You go in, you check a couple boxes, you point a couple, config files, and you're off and running, and optimization is enabled.
Is that similar to the QoS, in the old days for like VoIP?
So interestingly, yes, but no. So one of the biggest challenges in the past in doing this and having optimized video and voice is a limitation of QoS is that QoS sees network traffic as what it is. And I realize that's like the worst description I ever could have given. So QoS looks at network traffic, and if you're doing...
I'm going to take off 1 star, Kevin.
So I'm down to -1 now. Oh, God.
No. We were 5 so far.
So QoS would look at a network, and if you were doing like a broad soft call, right, or a Teams call, it's going to see that traffic in the network as Teams traffic or broad soft traffic, or we'll sum it all up and say voice traffic. The problem with DaaS is that now in DaaS you have traffic encapsulation, right? So now when QoS looks at the network, it sees DaaS traffic, and inside that DaaS traffic might be voice traffic. But QoS isn't smart enough or nuanced enough to be able to dig into it at that next level. So you could never optimize or do QoS voice or video traffic that was inside of a DaaS or a VDI environment, because from a network perspective, that's all just DaaS or VDI traffic. So that ability now to effectively decouple where the processing is happening from where the call is happening, that has eliminated the need for QoS to play in this space. But it's funny, when you talk about optimization, and we have a high-profile unified communications company that we actually partnered with to certify their solution working in our DaaS seat. And the first 2 or 3 conversations we had with them, we were absolutely butting heads every time we talked. And the reason why is we would say the word optimization. To them, it meant network optimization. To us, it meant WebRTC or HTML5 redirection. And it just took us 1 or 2 conversations to realize that we're using the same word to mean varying.
It's like tomatoes.
100%. So once we worked through that, and then we understood that was the challenge, that as a traditional voice company, they're looking at it thinking you optimize through QoS, right? We look at it as saying hey, as a compute company, we know QoS can't do this, so we're optimizing through redirection.
And you must really benefit now from the gig economy. People, it's BYOD. They may be employees or contractors for multiple companies at once. They can be from 9 to 12, they're working for company A, from 1 to 4, they're doing something else. And so the need to have a kind of virtual desktop that is, and then they run it on their own machine or whatever that may be. The need is really amplified because of the way the economy is. Is that a driver as well? Do you see that moving forward? That's what companies are doing, because they have to there might be 50% of the workforce is like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I probably wouldn't have thought of describing it that way, but I agree with you. We just tend to see it more from the company's point of view.
I'll take off 1 star for myself, Kevin.
All right, so we're both back to 5. We'll just level it out. No, so we tend to look at it more from the company side than the user side, right? So I think the user would describe it as a gig economy. The company would probably describe it more in terms of having remote international users or having some form of a high turnover workforce. One of my favorite use cases that we give is a company that came to us 2 years ago. They were a BPO, a business process outsourcer, that was the combined call center for a number of different energy companies. And I being 100% truthful here, right? We got on a call with them, and I think it was their CIO or their CTO said to us, "Kevin, I'm afraid that there is a Reddit post somewhere or a post on Twitter that tells people, hey, if you're looking for a free laptop, take a job with these guys because they'll ship you a device and then they won't come after you to come get it back. Because they were hiring agents around the world. And when they would hire an agent, they had an 8-week onboarding process for you to become a certified agent within their call center space, right? So before you ever picked up a phone and said, XYZ Energy Company, you went through 8 weeks of training to get you ready for that. I'll put you on the spot here, Dave. We'll see if we can get that star back. Can you take a guess as to what their attrition rate was through that 8-week process?
Percentage-wise?
How many folks do you think they were losing on that path?
Well, 8 weeks sounds like a long time, especially if you're remote, and you might, in the meantime, get another offer from somebody else. Because I'm just brainstorming right now. You get another offer, and it's maybe not a high-paying job to begin with because you're a call center. I would go with like 30%.
80%.
I was off. That was my next guess, Kevin.
So if you take the 3 and you flip it around and you put them next to each other,
You're too quick for me, Kevin. You're way too quick.
No, but imagine that, right? So 80% of the people that they hired, and every single time they would hire one of those people, they would go out and buy a laptop for them. And not just go out and buy a laptop for them, but go out and buy a laptop and have that laptop shipped to their corporate office and go through and configure it, set up whatever security, do whatever BitLocker they want to do on it, and then not just buy it, not just configure it, but then have to ship it back out, have it go through customs in whatever country it was going to. So, I mean, you can imagine, like, this was an arduous process, right? And, regrettably, we're not talking about super high-paying gigs here for the folks that are on the receiving end of these devices. So what impetus do they have to send that back to the company, right? They don't. So
especially if they're overseas, what are you going to do? You're going to chase them back? You're going to send them a letter saying, shame on you?
Yeah, or we're going to withhold your last paycheck that's worth 1/100th of what that device costs, right? So it was problematic to say the least, right? And even in the U.S., there are laws now at the state level that literally prevent a company from withholding a paycheck even if a user doesn't return company-owned or company-issued devices. So it's a problem that if you have to go out and procure and provision devices for your users, you are probably not effectively reclaiming them more often than not. So that's where companies can then lean into doing things like a DaaS solution to have that consolidated, secure, modern, simplified end user computing environment that allows them to get out of that device procurement game, allows them to get out of that device reclamation game as well.
And can you do a hybrid environment saying like, I only want DaaS for these group of individuals and then for the other ones, maybe not? Talk to me about that process. How do you get started? You don't have to necessarily go out and do company-wide if you don't have to.
No, not at all. And a lot of companies will kind of ease into it and they'll very often break it down by business units, right? So you'll make a compelling use case for, we have 3 different buckets of users in our organizations, and we're going to do these folks first. And hey, if that goes well, then we'll expand out and look at bringing other aspects of the company into the fold too. The only thing you want to just be conscientious of when you do that is, if you can't tell, I love all my little verbal acronyms and sayings. So I'm a big fan of like proximity breeds proximity breeds productivity, right? So when we think about DaaS, we always want to think about latency, but we think about latency in 2 regards, right? Everybody thinks about the latency between the user and the desktop. Nobody ever thinks about the latency between the desktop and the stuff, right? That highly technical term again. So whatever backend infrastructure you're connecting to, whatever SaaS applications, wherever in the cloud your things may live. So the only challenge if you piecemeal a company into a solution like this is you want to also make sure you're thinking about where that infrastructure, right, where that stuff resides. So you wouldn't want to say like, hey, I have an accounting department and a finance department. I don't know what the differentiation between the two is, but I have both. So they both access the same internal set of resources. They're both leveraging Great Plains. They're both using Dynamics. They're both using, IBM Cognos TM1, whatever applications might be out there. So we're going to move that stuff to the cloud, and then we're going to take the accounting department and put them in DaaS seats that's right next to that. But the finance department's going to stay where they are on their traditional end user computing devices. Not to say that you can't do that. You absolutely can. We just want to make sure that we understand what the latency impact of those kind of decisions are. So there's a little bit more planning, a little bit more process that goes into that, but that's not a bad thing. That just means we want to make sure we're walking into the solution with our eyes wide open.
So basically, you could almost, have a T-shirt saying like "Get closer to your stuff." Yeah, as your motto for the company. Uh, in actuality, this is what you were talking about, the end user experience, right? So you're still providing them access to that data, but in a much more, user friendly and by the way, it's really remarkable that the reason why there's such emphasis right now on that is that sometimes the user experience, meaning that the way you interact with the endpoint, is all you got from the company, meaning that there's no longer, you can't come to the office and whatever, there's no office. So the joy of working with the company, it really translates to how fast can you log in, how quickly the application respond. Can you access stuff without, stuff again? You can't access your stuff without grief. In that, to I would say, to maybe some of the younger generation, is really a big deal. And sometimes they would demand, they move to another company and they demand the same type of experience they had before, and they refuse to go back to maybe some legacy system, or log in, or it takes 10 minutes, 10 seconds to log in or send out or receive. So that's all they got from an experience of that company.
Yeah, look, I mean, work's hard enough at the end of the day, right? That's why they pay us all to go and do it every day. So everything that we can do to make that process easier for them, make that experience better, ultimately makes them more productive, right? And especially when we talk about CX with a customer focus, I'm a firm believer that there's a cycle in play here, right? If we can help a user make their life better, that makes them more productive. If we can make a user more productive, they're able to better service a customer. If they can better service a customer, it makes that customer happier. And a happier customer is easier to deal with, which makes that user's experience better, right? And it just keeps going around and around and around. So the more we can enable our people to do their job better, the more they can provide a higher degree of customer satisfaction, and satisfied customers are easier to work with.
In Kevin, from a security stack, right? So what are the advantages of having everything virtualized like this? The majority of the organization get breached through means of like phishing or social engineering, or easy to guess credentials, or I mean, you name it. There's a bunch of stuff. The weakest link is always the human, the person between the keyboard and the chair. But do you as a company, do you like assist with that? Do you help organizations become more secure?
We do. So I view everything that we do as a security enablement tool, right? So I'll kind of come out and say, we don't really offer security as a service. We don't really offer, I mean, we have some ancillary tools that we add into our solutions, but we aren't what you would consider to be a security solutions provider. But what we are is a security enablement tool provider, right? So all of the things that we're talking about in terms of like, how can I consolidate my environment? How can I make my environment inherently more manageable? How can I make things easier to administer? How can I better and faster distribute updates and patches? How can I better and faster distribute antivirus applications and definitions? How can I minimize the impact of if this physical device that's sitting on my desk here gets breached, that it doesn't have any kind of implications, let alone far-reaching implications for my corporate network? So all of those things come in to make an environment inherently more secure. And then I'm also a firm believer that recoverability is the ultimate form of protection, right? So if you have a proper disaster recovery, business continuity, and IT resilience approach where you're doing backup, you're doing replication, you have your data that exists in multiple locations, you have immutable copies from which you can restore, that to me is the protection when all else fails, right? Because if you can avoid an issue entirely, avoid it, right? If you can't avoid it, then defend against it. And that's where your EDRs, your MDRs, your XDRs come in. But even those things aren't foolproof. So if you can't defend against it, you need to be able to recover from it. And that's the fundamental approach of a defense in depth strategy that I think a lot of people are missing, right? A lot of folks don't consider their business continuity to be part of their security program. And I think that's where a lot of companies really miss the mark.
I completely agree with you. I think that's the key. A lot of companies have backup, but when it comes down to actually bring it back up, they are surprised how long it takes in a negative way. And then I would say also, it's really remarkable that insurance companies are now starting to demand some sort of criteria of how long it takes. Because it's one thing to be down 2 weeks from the business perspective, the impact of the business, and one thing to be down 2 hours. And so insurers would say, well, the fact that you have a backup is not just a check mark. You got to prove to us that you've tried to go back online and offline and back online in an efficient manner and show to us that you can actually continue doing business. Otherwise, we're not going to insure you. Is that also the case?
Yeah. Hey, if you have a disaster recovery plan and you haven't tested it, you don't have a disaster recovery plan. You have a disaster recovery hope.
Yeah, and hope is not a strategy, as we know. So talk to me, last but not least, talk to me about how does, I'm listening to this conversation and, I like what I hear. How do I get started? What's the kind of you come online, if they're lucky to have you, if not, if somebody else within the organization, and they say, okay, this is my environment. This is what it looks like. How do I get started? What's the process of turning the switch on?
Yeah, so obviously it depends on kind of what specific avenues you're pursuing, but I think it's taking that holistic approach of, look, in an ideal world, here's where we would be leveraging a DaaS solution with hosted infrastructure that has a business continuity arm behind it, with our unified communications working within that end user computing solution, right? And then you break that off into more digestible pieces, right? So especially for companies that have security concerns, if you don't have some form of fully documented, regimented, and outlined, not just disaster recovery plan, but a true business continuity strategy for your organization and a true defined program with its own policies that govern it, that's probably the best starting point, right? Because again, ensuring that you have that recoverability, that capability of bringing systems back should the worst happen, everything else probably should be ancillary to that. But once you have that as that foundation on which to build, then it's a matter of looking at where your organizational priorities are, right? Do you want to work in your hosting environment first? Do you want to do your servers and get that stuff either off the plate of running that internally, or maybe you're partnering with a provider who's offering hosting solutions that you're not enamored with at the moment and want to find alternatives? Excuse me. Does it make sense to look at changing the way you're doing desktop and simplify your edge computing? Is that the next step? Is your unified communications the next step? There are a lot of different paths that you can go. It really depends on what you want to accomplish.
But is it a forklift, or do you just add on? And what do you see the most successful one that are they streamline it and they can go from 0 to 60 in a relatively speaking easy manner? Like, what's the easiest way to pick? Is it to brand new, to saying everybody who's now joining the organization, or what's the easiest way, most, I guess, gold standard to turn on Evolve IP?
Yeah, so I don't know that there is necessarily one right approach, right? And it kind of comes back to that outcome-oriented IT. So I'd love to have conversations with customers who are early in that process, who maybe don't necessarily have their full plan together yet, but want to figure out what that plan should be based on the outcome that they specifically want to achieve. So if you're a new organization spinning up, then yeah, it's obviously a little bit easier for you because you don't have any baggage that you're bringing with you into that equation. So you can kind of build out for the idealized profile of what you want to be immediately. But if you're another organization, again, I think the thing a lot of us in the provider side kind of fail to realize when we engage with customers on a daily basis is nothing is the way it is by accident. Right? There is intent that's behind all of the decisions that IT has made over the years. And it might not be the best.
You surely hope so.
Yeah, it might not be the best intent. It might be because of budgetary restrictions. It might be because of internal corporate politics. It might be because of a high turnover within the department. But things aren't the way they are for no reason, right? There's no IT entropy. So I think taking that approach of understanding, kind of where are you today, a little bit of how you got here. We don't need to get too into the specifics. But once we have that platform from which to work, then let's collectively figure out where you want to go and work with, an Evolve IP and another company like us who can take that consultative approach of, we know what tools we have in the toolbox. So if you can give us an idea of what you want to build, then we can figure out collectively how to get there.
And Kevin, I think you just coined your next band name, IT Entropy.
There we go.
That'd be absolutely perfect. Do you think that your knowledge as a musician help you shape some of the insight into tech?
So first off, you're implying that I have knowledge as a musician, so I'm immensely grateful for that, but I've done nothing to prove that.
You can wire me $20 after the call.
Venmo's on its way. It's funny that you mentioned that, right? Because I'm in two different bands. I'm in one where it's more of almost like a traditional orchestra style band. So I play banjo in Philadelphia. We have this tradition called the Mummers. We perform every New Year's Day. So that's a big like 25, 30, 40 piece band that we play as an ensemble, right? And then on the side, I'm in an Irish rock and cover band. So Kevin Patrick Sullivan, a very, very Italian name if there ever was one. So I gig with them, most weekends. I think we're playing, like, we have some standing gigs here in the Philadelphia and South Jersey areas every week. But the thing that I've learned the most in both of those separate bands is how to listen, right? Because I'd say the way I play music, and I'm not saying it's the right way, I'm not saying it's even the good way, but the way I play music is 80% with my ears and then 20% with everything else. Because that ability to kind of pivot on a dime, that ability to kind of, hear what the rest of the band is doing around you and reacting to that. I have a saying there too, which is like, we didn't play the song wrong. It's just a version you've never heard before. But I think that directly translates into, what we do on a day-to-day basis, right? And obviously the comfort of being in front of a microphone, being on camera, being on a stage. In my early years, those things would have terrified me. Now, I don't care. Right? You put them in front of my hand, you put me on a stage and tell me you want me to go up there and talk about quantum physics for 20 minutes. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'll feel very comfortable going up there and having a conversation.
That's what happens when you get out of your comfort zone on a regular basis until you advance that comfort zone to a whole different level. So, but Kevin, it's been a really fascinating call. It's been amazing. Thank you very much for joining me today. Much, much appreciated. Last but not least, how do people get hold of you to know more about what you're doing, evolve IP, or find out what's the latest gig that you're playing?
So I won't subject anyone to having to listen to me sing and play guitar. That's just too cruel for even this crowd. But no, the best place you can find me is LinkedIn. So if find me on there. I'm regularly trying to contribute multiple times a week if the schedule allows. But email ksullivan@evolveip.net. And I have another kind of side piece that I'm always trying to get out there, spearheading the conversation around desktop as a service. So you can also find me on Twitter or X, whichever you prefer to call it these days, at the DaaS guy. So all one word, the DaaS, DAAS guy. And a lot of that's retreads of things that go in LinkedIn, but anywhere that we can go out there and have these conversations and evangelize about the benefits of consolidated end user computing. I'd love to have those conversations. And, especially if you're someone who's watching or listening to this and think I'm wrong, then by all means, please reach out. Let's find a way to talk, because I will never learn more than I will in having that discussion.
Yeah. And I completely concur as well. I mean, it's these conversations, even the difficult conversations you have to have with people. It's not about being agreeable, but it's about being, open up the discussion. So, but thank you very much again, Kevin. It's been a really pleasure having you on the show today. For all those who joined, thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you at the next episode. And until then, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.